I'm Herbert Dreiseitl, and I would like to talk a little bit about my life, how I came to the topic on landscape architecture. Well, it's really interesting. I'm very questioning myself, how did it start? And looking back in my life, I was actually really inspired by the beautiful landscape I was growing up. I had the chance with my parents to go very often to rivers, to mountains, to the Alps. And you see here myself as a little boy actually inspired by water, by landscapes, and actually later on with my family we were always visiting streams and rivers. And that was inspiring me quite a lot. But also what happened later on when I was like 14, 15, 16, I have seen the enormous impact we had on the environment. So I was also shocked in my life how I have seen glaciers shrinking, disappearing actually. A glacier very close to my home actually disappeared in my lifetime, and I was really shocked about this. So sensitivity about the environment was coming up very soon. Then in my little hometown, which is called Überlingen on the Lake of Constance, I have seen extreme floodings by huge thunderstorms, which were so extreme that our main train station was completely knocked off. It was flooded and no train could go for many days. I had the chance when I was about 50 to go in the Central Sahara. That was actually in Algeria. Hiking for several months with my friend the Tuareg through the Central Sahara was an eye-opener to me because we were totally depending every night to find water just for us to survive. And you know what? I have seen water as the most important landscape architecture element on these places, because if water comes, it transforms and shapes and restructures completely this part of the Sahara. And I also found interesting, how animals, how plants survive in these very remote places and these harsh conditions, and how just the little dew in the morning is enough for a lot of animals to survive. So this element of water, even a drop can give us hope and perspective. And this was an inspiration for me. How can we give actually perspective and hope to the next generation? That was a driver in my life. I also had the beauty and the fun, because I think it's not just the problems, it's also the opportunities, the chances we have. And I found always fascinating to look at children, to watch children on the beach, how they were observing and seeing water structures. And I did it also with my team, because I started 1980, my first team called Atelier Dreiseitl here in a small town called Überlingen on the Lake of Constance. I exposed my team always to observations, and not just academic studies, but real hands-on experience. How is water moving? What are the structures you can see? What forms and formations can you see when the tide is going off? How river systems work? What is the different oxbows you can find? And I also started to use this later on in therapeutic work and also in work with my students at the universities. So it was for me very important to get a kind of fluid thinking of an deeper understanding of movement and of resiliency, what water actually is in a deeper sense. And that is really fascinating to start also with art, because art is opening our fantasy, our thinking to a more complex knowledge about a kind of water wisdom. And I found it always, fascinating to actually help to start up, to come on new ideas of design. That always did interest me, and I still do today, teaching on different universities like in Singapore and other places, to help and to shape the next generations to be more open-minded for this. And it can be simple sketches, drawings, it can be actually with colors in different ways, and that gives actually the deeper understanding what we see. Because we see always things like in a nutshell, in a short moment, what we have to think in our mind about process, about time, about space, which we are usually not aware of. So that's all for me, landscape in the beginning. And landscape architecture is much more than that what we just see. It's basically a concept. It's almost like a spiritual concept which is standing behind that. And that is actually was the starting of a lot of my projects. My first projects were very simple. I started, what is a vortex? How can I celebrate a vortex in space? So I remember early projects I did with my friends, with architects like Joachim Epple in Tübingen for a housing estate called Schafbrühl. A very important place in Germany today because it's historically a very, very early on ecological building process. And it was actually also involving people in this process. Later on, I started as an artist to work on big scale models. So I used clay and I modeled with clay the full shape and the full form. I worked here on, I think I had 8 tons of clay hand modeled. And then finally we worked on that and we brought it into stone. This is in granite. It's actually carved out of Swedish granite stone, and that one is in Frankfurt at the town hall of Frankfurt-Hattersheim. Well, the same period was that I started to work in very close connection with architecture. So I said, what can we do? And this was actually before 1990. I started to think about, can I house rainwater? Can I recycle it? Can I also use gray water recycling? So the first early projects were actually, for example, in Nuremberg, Schafbrühl, where we collected the rainwater from rooftops. We stored it, we recycled it. We had even waterfalls where we brought fresh air into the housing estate in cafes and restaurants. And the whole thing was designed, you see on my early sketches, always thinking about movements and structures of water. So I also used light. I used glass structures. Here is a glass factory in Überlingen. Andreas Dierig was helping me on that project. It was really exciting about working in full scale and bringing light and water movement together. So my interest was always actually to bring art and architecture and environmental topics very close together. And that did actually inspire all my life and later on my projects. For me, the opportunity to work in American cities was always a great one because here in Ann Arbor, I could work for the City Hall, and it's actually in the entrance part. And this is basically a shield showing how raindrops actually are trickling down, creating shapes, creating forms. And you know what? I could work here really with computer models. We did carve out everything on 3D models, and then we started to cast it in bronze and in metal. And every piece was actually manufactured in America, so the design was done by myself, but everything I included all the different handcrafts firms from the United States. Well, these are some examples which also shaped my career. I had early on the opportunity to work in the project, we call them the Eber-Emscher Park project, which is the Ruhr Valley. This is the mining, the dirty stuff, where all the workers are basically had to work below the ground and bringing the mining stuff up here for energy. And to work in these actually remote places and to bring it up to a kind of new life and also working as a landscape architect and artist on that, to have a different kinds of point of view on these remote places was extremely important in my career. So structures again, forms and shapes, bringing the beauty even in this dirty landscape up to a new estate of acceptance and of tolerance and of bringing actually new life to this kind of remote places was a very important experience for me. So also to work with structures, with metal, with different structures of stones. And that finally brought me to working in my studio also on very large structures. I had 2000, just before 2000, the opportunity to work with Renzo Piano on the central part of Berlin. So when the unification between East and West Berlin was happening, we used water as a symbol to bring this kind of contrast together, to use it as a healing process between these two sides. How to work on that? How to bring water as a kind of storyline into this political realm, into this kind of understanding actually the storyline of that, what was happening in this time. That was very, very inspiring. So I worked here with full-scale models to test things out. And actually what we did was not to huge big pumps and big volumes, but more to work on a structure where the fine-tuning, the sound, the music, the reflection, the surface structure of water brings actually a quality to it. Because it was a dramatic time in Germany and also in the world, what was happening. And here also to work with water as a kind of learning process about how to bring polarities together, how to overcome this. That was an extremely important part. So Berlin, Potsdamer Platz around 2000 was actually giving hope to a whole new generation. And I think we still have today, we could learn a lot from that time because we are always coming to such points. What was also interesting here in this case is that we could harvest water, we recycled water, we used it in a kind of open lagoon system, and from there we used this water as a cooling factor for the city center to regulate the temperature and to buffer the temperature extremes, because that is actually happening today because of the climate situation we have. So early on, we were thinking about new solutions. A lot of people always ask me, Herbert, how did you get always these interesting projects around the world? And I have to say, when I'm thinking a little bit how did projects actually come about, it was basically my passion. I was always interested to try to find out something new or to go beyond. And of course, every project which was successful was actually opening up new opportunities. After Potsdamer Platz, actually a lot of people came up to me and said, oh, Herbert, could you do with your team a project for us? So actually at this time, Norman Foster was asking me and his team, Herbert, could you work with us on a project for McLaren in London? That project is very much combining blue-green infrastructure for a climate system for the entire plant, for the factory. So we were also at that time testing out new things with models. And instead of having cooling towers, we started to harvest the water from the entire car parking, from rooftops, and brought it actually basically together in a kind of formal lake. We recycled the water here, filtered it, and we used something new to use. Instead of a cooling tower, we had a kind of huge cascade where we actually sprinkle and bring the water down so that the job of falling down of water is cooling the water temperature. This is enough to have a cooling system for the entire factory. To make that work, again here we did full-scale mock-ups. So in my studio we were testing things out until we had the right proportion, the right dimension, the right amount of water. Then we produced all these small elements in France. We brought it then to London, and then we created a kind of cascading wall around this factory, which is bringing both together like a cooling system for the entire factory, but also a kind of sound structure which is surrounding this factory. And today is a very attractive, interesting thing because you can look out, you can see this glittering and beautiful sparkling water around, and you're in the middle of an interesting environment. And I think the plant is really exciting and really looks interesting. So it was for us a very good milestone to come up with then even more projects in this direction. The very early tests I did on climate resiliency was already 1982, 83 in Swiss villages. And you know, that was an interesting sign because people were making fun of me. They said, Herbert, you are just crazy. Why don't you let water just drain, bring it out of sight as we usually do it, and you hold it back, you do something with it? That's a waste of money and a waste of time. Today, actually, we call it the sponge city concept. That was an early idea, and I actually was very consequent going through that in many, many cities and many continents. how can I harvest water? How can I hold it back? How can I delay the process? How can I include cleansing process, evaporation for cooling? How can I create a kind of landscape which is also functional, very, very good for climate resiliency? So this was always the question on how to work on places between dry and wet. In Stuttgart, we had a very interesting situation. Just around 2000, the city was asking me to transform an army base from the American Army, basically for helicopters, the Nelling Barracks in Stuttgart, to transform it to a kind of sustainable and very good housing estate. So 140 hectares of land, quite a lot of people will live in this city. And the planning goal was actually to work on a sustainable landscape, which is fitting into this kind of old army bases and recycling the buildings, recycling the material of that. And it was really exciting. So what we started to do is, again here, to try to figure out what can we do with blue-green infrastructure. Can we harvest the water? Can we actually create a kind of relief where we use the topography of this landscape and use it like a treatment train to collect the water and to bring it down. We were trying to keep the structure and the character of this army base and transform it to a new modern living way, and create a kind of city with everything, with shops, with restaurants, where you have kindergartens and schools. And we created everything in this city so that it is very obvious and clear what's the water story, what's the story of landscape, what's the blue-green doing. So we didn't try to avoid anything to hide it. For example, the school here, which was done by the architects later, creating a kind of way to show if it rains that you have a waterfall, or that you have structures where the water actually can be celebrated, where you can see it. Kids could go out by rain and celebrate and see how water was actually running down. When there was no rain, these places could be used as a soccer field or something where you can play frisbee or whatever. So multifunctional use was actually coming very early into this project. Today it's a very vibrant city. People love to live there. It has a very good connection to the city of Stuttgart, and it's a very, very attractive place. Also, when there's a big storm or very heavy rain showers, no flooding is further down. It works perfectly and very well. The project of Offenbach in Frankfurt is another interesting example by recycling an industrial area on a harbor and to create out of this harbor an opportunity for new living and for a kind of exciting sustainable solution of being very close to water and to have still a very modern city life. The harbor was very much used by ships, by oil, by mining, by coal, and we used all these materials and a lot of the old cranes. We recycled basically the cranes and reused them in the new city. What is happening here in these plans is that everything about the new housing is basically on a peninsula, on an island. And again, here we used from any place a very direct connection to the river, which is here the river of Main. And today this place is extremely attractive, very vibrant. So the water system and the landscape system is woven. It's like a seamless transition between that. And the city, the new city structure is actually fading into that and transform the area. There are very attractive restaurants, there are cafes. It's a very vibrant place. And I think that's the way how we could work as landscape architects. How to transform also some of old industrial sites and to bring it to a new life and to a new attractive modern way of working in a city. A good example is probably Tanner Springs Park in Portland. On this project, we actually do the following thing. We had a very industrial site. Pearl District was quite a lot of craftsmanship. And when it was getting into housing real estate, the project was really the question how to involve the citizens. In all my projects, I'm very interested to get the citizens on board. So what I do is I do public workshops and I do hands-on experiments with the public community. Instead of having endless discussions which always go about opinions, I try to get visions for this population to think about how could the future look like. I try to engage also young people because it's not about the 60s plus, it's about young people to have them on board and to get them involved. Here we use, as you see, same like what I actually have shown in the beginning. We use art exercises, art experiments. And this eventually helps to understand the whole process. What can we do to harvest water, to collect it, to bring it into the park, to filter it, to slow it down, to store it. Finally, also to use this water to recycle it, to bring it back, and to filtrate and to bring it into the ground. So these early experiments were very successful because they showed that you can really treat water on site and you can clean it so that you can either reuse it or you can bring clean water into the rivers and streams without any pollution. And it also helps to create a better microclimate in the city. So all these pocket parks are basically multifunctional cells of little oases in the city. I still remember at that time how people called it boutique ecology, and they made fun and jokes about it. But today, actually, it's something we very much look for. Many pocket parks, many opportunities, many rooftops, many streets, which all have the same goal to help to make the climate in a city better. Well, these early projects were giving also hope about how can you include art or how can you recycle material. In this one, I was able to collect all the train tracks of this area. And I said, let's get these train tracks and recycle them, reuse it. So in this project, we used these train tracks as an art wall. And the art wall is nothing else than peeling back the skin of the city and showing what was there before. And the recycle of this steel is now actually a design process of the park. So you see the whole process, how to peel back these different layers and to bring up the landscape back again into the city. This now on a much larger dimension was for me opportunities I had in Copenhagen, in Hamburg, and also in the city of Singapore in Asia. Singapore, a very interesting case. I started about 15 years ago in Singapore to come up with a concept, we call it the ABC Water Guidelines, the active, beautiful and clean waters for Singapore. What we basically did, we did pilot projects. I opened a new office in Singapore, and to come to this design, it is a long journey because it's actually thinking about what can we do to collect every drop of rainwater on site, how to bring it slowly into action, to evaporate, to filter, to use any opportunity, and in the case of Singapore, even to store the water as a reservoir, which is used for recycling water so that we finally can get the catchment of the city as drinking water. Well, this was a very exciting project because it was actually bringing up the position of a landscape architect to a very prime and very important prime position in the planning phase. I had to fight to bring landscape architecture to this level. And I had really to fight a lot with engineers and with architects to say, hey guys, we are the prime. We are the prime in the discussion because we set the tone where to work with water in this scale. And it actually worked out. Today, Bijan Am Mokyo Park is one of the most successful projects in Asia. It is copied on many places. And we have a very successful team even today called now Henning Larsen. And many others are actually copying this idea to bring this kind of new type of landscape into the city. So we recycle material, we change monsoon drains completely to a different kind of setting. We recycle, we make it opener, we create kind of valley structures, which can actually also handle that. We bring side streams into that. We daylighten forgotten streams, daylighten and bring them up again. And this kind of resilient spaces, where you see here the old canal and the new one, is helping to shape and to create a new livability in the city. Not only that, this kind of landscape actually can handle big storms. So when there's a heavy rain shower, this water can be held back, can be delayed, can slowly go out. And actually, a lot of these concepts are now actually spread around in Asia and around the world. Multifunctional spaces bring people together, and people certainly closer to water. And when it was a flooding, maybe a day before, next day, the water is slower and people can use it. I'm very interested in this kind of shift and change of mindset of citizens. And that can be in different scales, on big scale, on small scale. And that is something we have to handle today and to shape for our next generations. It's also about cleansing, about what can we do to filter and to use nature-based solutions, to use systems which are not using chemistry or high tech, but very, very sort of intelligent, smart, nature-based solutions. And that can be done in different scales, on big scales like this one, also in Namokyō Park, but also up to small scales. And it's all about bringing people closer to an urban nature. And it's about bringing children more to understand how is nature working, to have actually a better understanding of what is really value in our cities and what is value for next generations. How can we take more care? I think this part of landscape architecture is something which is, for me, a very important part. And that's why I'm doing a lot of consultation today to many cities. A good side effect is also that natural capital is coming back to cities. We have enormous variety of biodiversity coming back into cities. Singapore is a very good case, and it's now called even the city within nature. I'm sure the future can develop even further and even more. But I was very happy to be actually on the forefront of this development and help to shape cities. A very important part is health. We are all depending on the environment. And we know today that, for example, to have aging well, or to have less depressions, to have less diabetic, to have less Alzheimer and dementia depends on that you are active, that you are outside, that you use the open space. So that's why it is so important to create these open spaces attractive, so that you are invited and that you love to go out in the morning. Going out every morning to do exercise helps you to reduce a lot of your medicine you otherwise would have to take. Finally, Namokyō Park is today a very good showcase. It is copied many times, and I'm really proud that this project could be a role model for many other cities. If we remember the COP21 conference in Paris, we were still having the opinion we might keep the temperature by 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. I was actually present at the COP21 conference in Paris, and I have given lectures and talks and contributions to that. I know that we will fail. We will not keep this goal. And so for me, landscape architecture has a much bigger task and objective, really, to find out what can we do to make our cities basically livable, so that we can survive in our cities. How can we create shade? How can we bring water, blue-green infrastructure in our cities so that we have a cooling effect? That day and night we can somehow also go out and use these spaces. So I think there's a lot more what we can do and what we have to do. And my whole work on this life period where I was trying to fight for was basically about what can we do to give next generations opportunities and hope. I'd like to share with you a project which is still ongoing. And it's one of my newest projects where I still struggle with finances, so it's not finished. This is for the city of Milwaukee. And this is actually the Catalano Square in the third ward in the industrial district in Milwaukee. So when I was visiting this place, I was actually seeing how actually the current situation is really totally run down. It's very industrial at this moment. And I had the chance to work with the foundation, which is also celebrating Gary Grunau's memory, a person who did a lot for the city. And I was actually trying to find out what can we do to make this city part more attractive. So I started with sketches and with different renderings. How could a place for water be celebrated here in the city? And how can it be an inspiration for the surrounding? So the topic here was very much, how can we make very much car-centric street to a more pedestrian-centric street? To more livability, to something where you can go out day and night, where it's vibrant, where it's active, where it's more like for people and not just for cars. And that's an ongoing project which is inspiring, and I think that's also more and more what we have to do in future. And here it's a combination between landscape architecture and art. So instead of having a boring situation at the moment where you just can put a Christmas tree in the middle, I'm more thinking about creating a space for multi-generations, for young people, for older people, and we celebrate the different seasons which we have in Milwaukee. Wisconsin has this amazing spring and fall colors and strong winter winds and coldness and warm and wet summers. How can I actually celebrate this kind of four seasons in an interesting way in the city? So we started to come up with all kinds of ideas and renderings. And again, here on this project, we started to make full-scale mock-ups, full-scale models. In this case, I was using an empty factory here in my hometown in Überlingen in Germany. And I used this to make a mock-up model, first with different heights and levels. It's basically the full-scale plaza in Milwaukee. So here my team is starting to build up the under construction. Then we started to bring up here 9 tons of clay. So we modeled the entire structure as a 3D model with water tests. So each part of that was tested out in full scale with flowing water. And we were always trying to correct and find out what could be the right shape and how could we make it even better so that the flow of water is actually more dynamic and more attractive. You cannot simulate this on computer models. There's a kind of limitation. But if you do it in a full scale, models in clay material, which you can always recycle, it is getting really interesting. Then finally here, we invited the University of Wisconsin, of Milwaukee, and students came over and they used 3D scanning systems. We used different ones, including even their cell phones, to get every little detail and every point exact by parts of millimeters. So we used this data material, and out of that we had a 3D model in scale. So starting from the first hands-on model, we used a computer digital model, and that will be then used in America in a factory to build out the stonework in granite. And then this part will be actually put on this side. So here you just see our happy team. And of course, we had a very, very big fun here to do this. And we're still at the process at the moment. The project is on hold, because we need to get some more sponsoring for the project, and I'm very much hoping that we can actually do it. I would be very much pleased because it's for me like one of my last masterworks maybe in my life. To do that for Milwaukee would be a great honor for me, and I think also for the people who are involved in this project. What I do today is very much that I try to help cities to shape their policy, their concepts, their long-term visions, to go more for blue-green. and to have more nature-based solutions in their cities. So some examples, this one is actually in the Czech Republic. It's actually the home cities of my parents before World War II was ended. My parents had to leave from this place, and I was later, as a kind of second generation or even third generation, I had the chance to come back to work in these cities. Also about having a vision plan for water and greenery in this city. I worked with about 200 citizens on roundtable discussions. And this process of bringing different aspects and different stakeholders together on roundtable discussions, thinking about how could the future of a city look like? How can we bring more nature into our cities? How can we bring better technology of blue-green structures in our cities? How can we share spaces? That is actually something which is absolutely needed for the future. So I'm still organizing today conferences like here, multi-agency workshops for Singapore. Here, for example, I just have done one here in November 2024. So different agency groups come together to discuss about a part of Singapore. How can it look like? What can we do? How can we bring it to the future? Finally, I'd like just to share with you my journey, which really started with small art projects, then was spreading out to go more to villages, then to cities, then even to the entire structure of city planning in the future. And often I go back again to my small detail. So in my career, no matter what scale, the storyline is always similar. And it's very much about this: how can we care of nature? How can we bring natural environments in a very intelligent way new into our urban context? It cannot be a copy and paste model. It has to be transformed, but I'm sure we have to develop new ways and new methods. And that's why landscape architecture has also to come up with a kind of new approach, a new thinking. In my career, I had never the chance in the beginning to be academically educated, so I was learning by doing person. And then later on, I was going to universities, teaching and doing research. And that was also interesting for me because opening up things just by basically the common sense as an inspiration for what you do was for me very helpful. And I would wish that next generations could be less academic, but more hands-on and with more passion to come up to give this profession really a better perspective for the future.